Grant, so as Jack said, we're looking at data-driven decision making. We were here with you last week, or many of you anyway, looking at the breeding side of things, taking a focus on how we can make, more critical, more, informed decision making for our breeding stock, and really looking at how we can balance that efficiency in the system to breed more efficient, profitable ewes. And tonight we're going to look at the overall flock management. So taking a flock level or a group level within the flock level, kind of data analysis look at how we can improve decision making. Why are you doing that, I suppose? Well, you can't manage what you can't, or in brackets, don't measure, because generally we can measure most things. We're going to use that data to give us clarity on performance, and from that make more informed decisions. But also not just about kind of pulling apart and trying to find problems, which you'll see in the KPIs, also giving us confidence in our current and future decision making. So if we can see that we're doing things right, that'll give us confidence to keep going with them in the future. It also allows us to better prioritize and better allocate our time and resources. So we'll talk about it later on, but for example, if we know where our lamb losses are coming, we can better allocate our time in trying to improve that. Or we can allocate resources to boost our scanning, for example, and our time. We can also use it to identify issues before they're clinically visible, and we'll speak about that in the context of monitoring lamb growth rates. And to my mind, anyway, ultimately we can use data in two ways. We can use it, at the end of the year, we do all our KPIs in the flock, and we do it in reflection. We do, key performance indicators, we review past performance, and we try and learn from that and use it to inform our future management. Or we can do it more in a monitoring sense, for example, monitoring lamb growth rates during the finishing period and doing reactive, adaptive management to that. So what are we seeing? How are things performing? Should I intervene? Should I change something? But data collection and recording is time consuming. We often might, to make it efficient, incorporate some sort of investment in tech. So there's a cost associated and a time associated with it. So it must ultimately generate value. Too much data can be overwhelming and can actually be a barrier to people making use of that data. It is worth trying to get maybe some advice or a computer software to help you with that data analysis. And ultimately, we need to have clear objectives. We spoke about that with our breeding, but we also need clear objectives as to what we want to record and what are the key KPIs to help us get to where we want to be and understand how we're performing. So we've got clear objectives and a clear plan for the year about when we're going to record. For commercial flocks, I think it's good to see how much recording you probably do already in terms of statutory information or stock numbers. Our key ones would be most flocks with pregnancy scan. We can learn a lot from that. We'll generally have records on mortality and cull information. And if we record causes of death or even look into them, we can learn more from that. We also potentially have weights and body condition score on ewes, and body condition scores we'll talk about is an absolute key KPI throughout the sheep production cycle, influencing basically all the output traits. And we've also got a multitude of traits that we can record at lambing as well that we spoke about last time. On the lamb front, we'll have numbers, and actually just getting a number on all the lambs in a flock at key handling times is actually a key KPI here to help us generate an understanding of where lamb losses are coming from. We'll also have weights and growth rates, and we'll have sales profiles and carcass data that we can learn from as well. And all this as well should inform not just our inputs that we're going to put in on our time, but also potential for testing. For example, we've got fecal egg counts, we could be looking at worms, we could be looking at fluke, we've got pasture covers, we've got forage sampling. We could also look into blood testing if we can see from the data that there's other problems at foot. For example, disease testing for disease or ice-borne diseases. We might blood test for minerals. We might also, if we've got concerns, look at metabolic testing of ewes pre-lambing, and that's more data to then inform our decision making, particularly if we're going to then put in costly inputs to try and remedy the situation. I'll pass you over to Duncan for an introduction.
Just check. Yeah, I'm not on mute. Great. Hello, folks. Just a quick recap for those who this is the first time they've joined us if we weren't there last week. My name's Duncan Nelless. I farm a 5-member family partnership in mid-Northumberland, between Alnwick and Morpeth. Rothbury's our nearest town, so you might know the Coated Valley. As it says on the slide here, we're just recently we've added another 330 hectares of upland grazing in North, within a reasonable distance of our home farm. So that has just came out to us in May. So we're now farming 860 hectares, mainly sheep and suckler cows. So we'll have 2,000 clean ewes to the ram this year, and there'll be about 2,000 ewe lambs. we've been performance recording since, performance recording and sending performance data to Signet since 2006. And then we're also part of the RAM Compare project. For those of you who don't know, that's a commercial progeny test for terminal sires run by the levy boards to commercially test terminal rams and generate a single EBV for them. We also have 260 Angus-based suckler cows. We put Herefords on them as well, but they're still largely Angus-based, and we usually finish all with surplus stock that isn't retained. Though we have sold a bit of few store cattle this year. We also have a Christmas turkey venture we've been running for quite a while, so that's just about to kick off in 3 weeks today. So Merry Christmas, everybody. I'll have that next slide.
And Duncan, why do you record?
Why do we record? Well, one of the reasons we started recording was to kind of take control of our own breeding objectives. I suppose that was the main one, and to stop having to making genetic mistakes was probably the original one. But now, as we go on, we get a lot more from recording than just the genetic evaluations. You can on-farm identification of poor performance, and some of the things that you don't have genetic correlations with, so we can actually inform our investments by making use of growth rates to inform investments in things like reseeding, liming, or subdivision. The effective parasite challenges, and and the positive effect of clean grazing can be made apparent, and sort of inform how much effort and investment you can put into those sort of things. And if we're recording, we know that where we need to target our labor and resources. So hopefully it informs business decisions, as well as hopefully making genetic improvements. And one of the big gains of performing of individual performance recording is stopping identifying poor performers and stopping them going further, their genetics going further down the flock. I think, has that been it?
That sounds good. Nope.
Yeah.
I think speaking to you, Duncan, as well as the breeding side of things, I spoke to you about that sort of data to influence management. To me, it's really been about that learning that you've been on through it, and how it's reinforced the importance of certain things, or the importance of, for example, your high clover lays in your finishing system, or the value of clean grazing. You've got a stat there about some groups being 60 grams behind. I think quite often it's about reinforcing quite often what you're doing right to really give you the backing to keep doing it.
Yeah, that is definitely right. The value, when you put a daily live weight gain value onto an individual lamb, you think, well, that's not great. 30 grams a day is very little. But if you times it by 2,000 lambs, and then multiply that by 56 days, it sharp comes to a significant amount of live weight that you can get on. And in a lot of cases, it's actually a free hit. It's just by doing a better job. So you don't actually, you don't have more. You're not increasing the U base. You're not increasing your labor. You're not increasing your scan. That is just with the lambs you've almost got on the ground. So you don't actually, within reason, as long as you're kind of aware of the improvements you're making, that is the key thing. But I think it just, when you can actually put a monetary value onto something, and actually identify a loss, it does focus the mind quite a bit. Like quite a lot of these things, quite often they don't tell you, like a lot of recording and a lot of benchmarking and things like that. When you first start off, they rarely tell you you're cleverer than you thought you were. So it's just something that everyone makes mistakes, and I'm as guilty as any of it, because we're quite keen on trying new things, so we do get quite a lot wrong. But identifying those mistakes early is probably one of the best things about recording.
I think, yeah, it can be an eye-opener. We'll move on to KPIs now. Just to give a bit of more structure to the night, we'll look at KPIs first. We'll kind of look at that, 8-week weaning type weight performance. We'll then look at lamb finishing, breeding new hogs, and then a bit about the ram compare project at the end. So in KPIs, I think they're actually something that every farm should do, but actually when you've probably figured it out, probably quite few go to the level of actually figuring out lamb loss KPIs or their true rearing rate. And so many of us just have a good look at the scanning records and, move on. But there's so much more we can learn. And ultimately, you're analysing data into what they call key performance indicators, which generally means converting data into percentiles. So you can try and interpret that data and give something useful from it. And you can benchmark against, it doesn't matter what size your flock is or the groups you're comparing. If you put it into percentages, then you've got a means of comparison. And ultimately, it's to give clarity on performance and to try and give a focus. And you're trying to do it on the key profit drivers. There's 1,000,001 KPIs you can make, but you want to look at the key ones that are going to actually go on and influence your management. But again, data in isolation is meaningless. And actually, we need a source of comparison on which to review and gauge performance going forward. If we're thinking about benchmarking, I think let's do them in the reverse order. The first point I think of note would be to look at your flock yourself and looking at previous years and tracking your own performance to look where you want to go. And also, if you've got more data, perhaps on a managing group level as well, and we'll see that with Duncan, where you can give even more learnings if you know how different groups would be managed, and you can get almost like an on-farm trial on the go. And look at previous years. We've then got industry benchmarks, and we'll go through them. There's some pretty, probably quite standardized now targets between outputs from such as FAS, AHDB, QMS. But I would also highlight that I think the Cattle and Sheep Enterprise Profitability booklet from QMS is really worth a look. They're not just targets, but it's actually actual farm figures. So I think there's a lot of interest there in looking through how similar systems are performing. And they're not all going to be those target figures. But so it's kind of maybe good something to give yourself confidence in where you're going, and there'll be a top third and an average to compare to. And I think once you've got a bit of data behind you, joining a discussion group and discussing with other farms is potentially the most valuable thing you can do as well. Duncan, be interested to know sort of what your key benchmarks would be or what you've found. I know you're pretty keen on a discussion group.
Probably would start with probably the main reproductive ones for cattle and sheep. Trying to keep a low barren rate, trying to keep what you'd say was a optimal scan. We don't always achieve that, we're kind of with single site. That is one of the drawbacks we have with single sire mating, is we do tend to mess up our winter grazing a little bit. And then we're looking at maintaining good early growth. When especially if we're looking at genetics, good early growth, an 8-week weight is a good proxy for, like, you, especially if you're aware of the lamb litter size and mortality at an early stage. How a ewe performs with a lamb crop at 8 weeks is a proxy for a lot of things. Probably a good mum. If they're staying around about 300 grams a day, to that say she's probably a good mum. She's milking well, and she is looking after them, and hopefully looking after ourselves. So we do quite a bit of body condition scoring. So we do 4 body condition scores a year, and we're kind of looking at maintenance of weight and body condition score, and it's one of the key ones as well. And there are other things, ewe efficiency, and we'll probably come to a few more later.
Certainly will. And in terms of sort of what you're benchmarking against, you'll have quite a body of information. You've also been involved in a few groups. Have you seen?
Yeah, we do. I mean, we use what was of the Farm Business Survey and Farm Bench. We've been using them too for quite a while. We're part of a group that, to be fair, has shrunk quite a bit, but we have a benchmarking group that we'll work against, and that is a good one to be involved with, because we make sure we can, we've built up trust over the years, and we can make sure that we're putting data in that fits in the same parameters, you know. So things like weaning age and date of your year end, all those sort of things that are going in, and what is going in as financials, and what pocket, if you like, we make sure is sort of standardized across the group. But the big win is really the benchmark against our previous selves to just check that we keep on continuously moving in the right direction. I think that's kind of one of the, you get sometimes down with faint praise being called progressive. When progressive has just been better than you were yourself, that's what I would define as a progressive farmer. Just trying to get better yourself, you know. It's yeah. Sometimes I don't always feel it's meant as a compliment.
Continued progress.
Yeah.
So we'll move on, and we're going to look at a lot of KPIs, but I think the one KPI you quite often won't get actually is what is the optimum scanning KPI, because it's so systems dependent. And I think quite often it's one of those key ones where bigger isn't always better, because with a higher scan generally becomes more labor, more requirement for feed resources, and more time involved in trying to manage potentially more lambs and trying to avoid mortality. What we can see here, I think it's quite a good graph looking at scanning percentage on the bottom and the percentage of that given single spin or triplets within the total scan. And essentially what we can see is that up to about 185%, we get a continuous increase in twins. But thereafter, the more we, probably in partly true for breeding as well, but thereafter, the more we push for an increased scan, what we actually find is that yes, singles continue to drop a little bit, but actually we see more replacement in twin into triplets. And it's after that sort of 180% that we see a massive rise in triplets. So actually your optimum scan really is about the percentage of triplets that you think you can handle in your system and what's appropriate. So particularly for an outdoor lambing system where you might not be twinning on, and you're probably depending on your feed resources, your grazing that you've got, you're probably not realistically looking for a 200% scan. And actually for a lot of flocks, to my mind, targeting about 185 is probably a pretty optimal scan for a lot of flocks. And actually for some flocks, maybe later lambing and much more low input systems, actually even in crossbred use looking a bit lower is actually quite often appropriate. So we get our scanning results back. I think one of the key ones again would be looking at KPIs would be your barren rate. And actually for most flocks, that's your key metric for quite often that you need to look at. We're looking at a target of about 2% on the industry KPIs for barren rate, but many flocks will be higher. And actually in terms of barren rate, it's probably more about tracking your own decline or your own increase in barren rate over time to give yourself kind of to demonstrate the value. For example, if if you're taking on a new mineral regime, for example, that it's actually working. And also kind of bearing in mind that not all supplements are actually created equal, and some mineral boluses, for example, aren't as effective as others, even though they might say it on the tin. So it's always worth tracking that you're actually getting a payback, I suppose, on your inputs. In terms of key drivers, again, going back to that scanning, we're quite often quite quick in the industry to, look for a quick fix out of a bag or a bottle, but actually so often it's actually just basic nutrition that it comes down to that's influencing your scanning results. So that's nutrition at scanning, sorry, not at tupping. So having good quality pasture in front of them, but also using target body condition score where you're looking at about 3.5 for sort of lowland upland type, crossbred ewes. And if we've got that right, and it's also not just about having covers as you go into tupping, but can you continue to have good covers? And quite often with more later lamb flocks, actually the issue might lie that you're having a deterioration in quantity and quality of forage going into that second cycle that might be having an impact as well. We'd then be thinking about things like minerals. We could also have issues with things like fluke. And also on a group level, we might see tupping infertility issues as well. But thereafter, we've covered all those bases and we're confident that they are perhaps not the limiting factor. We might go into a bit more scary territory where we're considering, do we have something like an iceberg disease problem, OPA-MB, that could be influencing the scan. So again, it's just about having that data to try and influence and maybe work with your vet to try and find solutions to the problems. In terms of calculating KPIs, I think the key point here, there's plenty of resources online. But the key point to generating KPIs for your flocks would be that rearing rate and your scanning rate, or ewe mortality or lambs. It's about using the number of ewes to the top and not number of ewes that you've scanned. Because quite often we'll find that there's quite high ewe losses over winter and they can't just come for free. So we need to use the topping rate, because ultimately that the number of ewes put to the top is good. That is your potential for output, and any losses thereafter should be highlighted within the KPIs. So it's starting off with ewes to the top. We then might look at scanning in isolation, so looking at the percentages of multiples and twins and barren rate, but we'll also look at scanning rate total based on ewes to the top. And actually a key driver I've just said of that can also be ewe mortality, not just about the barren rate in terms of giving ewes that don't yield a lamb. We then look at having the number of lambs recorded, and it'll depend on your system how valuable it is to record each type, or how much how much time you've got to put in. But if we can have lamb numbers at lambing, even better if we can do alive and dead, or lambs turned out alive, and then we try and get lamb numbers at marking. That might be an outdoor system, that might be your first lamb number, and then thereafter we can try and build this picture up of when lambs are being lost. We then try and get our lamb numbers weaned, and that's of course an absolutely key KPI for the flock. And ultimately that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to bring up the number of lambs reared to generate more profit. And we'll also have number of lambs sold, and we can look at KPIs for finished as well. And if we're looking at calculating the lamb losses, what we would do is we'd take the number of lambs scanned, and we'd take away from that the number of lambs weaned. So we'd have the number of lambs lost. We'd divide the number of lambs lost by the first number, in this case the scan percentage, and times it by 100, and that'll give us our percentage of lambs mortality drop from there to then. If we're looking at daily live weight gains and we're just trying to do it by hand, there's also a way of doing it without having a lot of EID equipment. If we can try and adjust for the age of the lambs, and we can adjust for birth weight as well, we can get a growth rate out of that. In terms of industry benchmarks, these are taken from the Forage for Sheepman's Guide, but they're quite universal when we look over it. We're looking at kind of target barren rates of less than 2%. But again, it's quite often about tracking that. Ideally, ewes fail to lamb about 4%, and we're trying to get ewe mortality down below 4%. But I would highlight that on a lot of farms that have KPI'd, ewe mortality has been a key driver in all this in terms of lost production. We're also looking for a flock replacement rate of around about 23%. Again, this is driven by ewe mortality, but also sort of depreciation on those ewes in terms of loss of teeth and mastitis and things. So it's a bit of a reflection on if something's going wrong. But some flocks will choose to turn over their flock faster to achieve genetic gain. So it's one to kind of take a bit with a bit of thought. Thinking about lamb mortality, I think this is when it gets quite exciting in terms of trying to target where our problems might lie, is when we've got that information about the lamb numbers at scanning, lamb numbers at birth or target marking, and then maybe at weaning, we can then look at when those lambs have been lost. And through that, we can then target our input. Can we understand if it's high in the scanning to birth, well above target? Potentially we might have an abortion issue. And although we might be aware that we've got slight problems, I think the data can sometimes just back you up and get you to go and, take action on it. From birth to marking, we might have issues with predation, but we might have issues, for example, with Clostridial or worms, or whether we vaccinate or not will depend. And we can look at lamb losses. And we've also got target weights here, which we'll speak about later on. But you're really wanting lambs to be well in excess of 20 kilo at 8 weeks if we're going to make that target of at 90 days at being over 30 kilo. And sort of finally, just to kind of highlight, I think this is one thing that some people quite often get wrong when they're looking at KPIs, is what is meant by losing 15% when you're working on numbers over 100. So, for example, quite often people would see if they drop from a 200% scan to 170% rear, and they would say, I've lost 30%. No, you haven't. There's a 30% increment drop, but actually that would be a 15% lamb loss. So for example, if we've got 100 ewes and they have 200 lambs, and we lose 30 lambs, so that's 15 from each 100 lambs born, we lose 15%. And that means that a scan of 150%, for example, to lose 15%, there wouldn't be the same level of drop, but it would be the same number of lamb losses. So that's why we want to look at it in terms of lamb losses, and not just trying to figure out from the drop that we can see. ultimately you're doing this to target your resources. And also if we can review by management group, we can sometimes get some next level decision making. We can really pull apart, for example, if we have lamb losses by gimmers, for example, or ewe lambs separate from mature ewes, or different management groups, we can just learn more about what's going right or wrong. Just a bit, a stat, I suppose, from Beef and Lamb New Zealand is that there's 5% drop in lamb survival for every half a body condition score below 3 at lambing. So although we might be looking at, factors that we can see on the ground, quite often we've already lost production if those ewes are in suboptimal condition. We're not going to go on and perform. And I'll pass you over to Duncan.
We use it to compare between groups quite a lot and trying to identify where we are what we're doing right or doing wrong in a field. So there's just two sort of that are out of the kind of the middle of the scan, but because we're single sire mating, we're able to keep a relatively good track on the management and the effective management of once on scan. So these two groups here that, as you can see, are quite a big difference in it, and really that goes to my mind. If you knew those groups would just be sort of pre-lamb, up to tupping, but also probably one of the main differences here was immediately post-mating nutrition and not doing a good enough job. So it probably drove a bit of embryonic loss into the lower group that we call Thornton Drive. That was what we thought was a good arable stubble with a lot of green on it, but just probably not got enough guff in it to keep lambs in use at post mating. And last year there was, we had a bit of Christmas snow and frost, and there probably just wasn't enough to keep them right. So they got there, and they'll probably lost a little bit of condition on that as well. Whereas the other one were just in a much more of where would like them to be on target with the grass I had in front of them at mating. So it allows us to not all. It's a lot of what we're doing is not necessarily genetic. It's a lot to do with management groups as well, and it gives us a bit more of a clue, hopefully going forward, to stop making those mistakes. It doesn't always work because and like sometimes you're just not, you have to go with what you've got really. But it is always an interesting thing to be able to analyze that, and because I suppose that averages can be misleading is quite a pertinent point for a lot of things. Especially, I always think of birth weight as a classic of that, in that you probably nearly always are. If you weigh at birth, like we weigh quite a lot of animals at birth, and what average moves very little. But it's the extremes that give you the problems. The very light or the very heavy lambs that give you the problems. So an average birth weight doesn't tell you a heck of a lot. Really, what you need to eliminate is the extremes on the. If you can imagine birth weights in a bell curve or any other trait in a bell curve, probably just going for something that is not non-extreme would be our target, I would have said. Yeah, so we'll go to the next one.
And in the context of scanning, I suppose it's not about trying to have the average. We're actually trying to get 90% plus of our ewes on target. We want that whole left-hand side to shift to the right.
Exactly.
So there's always going to be a range, but I guess that comes back to trying to manage your ewes going up the tupping.
Yeah.
To try and understand it. This is actually an example. If you don't use a lot of technology, there is options there just with pen and paper or an Excel document to record you body condition score. If you are, wanting to try and review that, there is the option. Just looking quickly then at sort of performance to weaning. We're monitoring lamb weights. Ideally, we're looking at ewe body condition score and recording any treatment. So there's still quite a lot of data that we can have to that point. We've got sort of industry targets here, and I'll pass you over to Duncan in a minute to speak about what they're looking for. But ultimately, we're looking at we're looking at achieving over 320 grams a day to 8 weeks, because we're trying to be weaning over 30 kilo at average of 90 to 100 days. And actually, we're never going to achieve that with post 8 week growth rates if we don't have a good pre 8 week growth rates. We need that over 300 grams a day to achieve that. And there's just a multitude of factors again that you would be looking at in terms of what could influence that. It's all about, there's genetics at play. there's pre-lamb and nutrition, there's body condition score. So you've already set a lot of that up. Beef and Lamb New Zealand, again, with another quote, found that there was a weaning weight reduces by 6% for every half a body conditioner score under 3 that use our lambing, or if you lose half a body conditioner score over winter, regardless of what weight she ends up at that point. It's about that loss in condition can have an impact on subsequent nutrition and ewe milking ability and colostrum. So we've got all these nutrition factors. We've also got factors such as ewe age and development. For example, it might be a case of we might know there's a bulk of ewes that we might know that there's an underperformance going on, but it might only be in a certain age group, and quite often that's skimmers. We look at forage quality, quantity, trace elements, and also factors such as disease. And this is just a nice graph, I thought, from Ram Compare, just to share. We got this from Sam Boone at Signet, that shows on the left-hand side your 8-week weight. So this is at Thistleyhaugh. This is a whole lot of lambs, 8-week weight, and we've got days to slaughter. And really what it highlights here is this left-hand side where they're hitting heavy 8-week weights, they're going to go on, and go on and finish quick. But if they don't, it can fairly drag out, because ultimately you never get the opportunity to get as high growth rates generally in older lambs, but also by that point, you've probably lost forage quality and quantity on the farm as well. So you really want to make the most of that time. And here's just an example of some of Duncan's KPIs on that side of things.
So like that, this is this is an example of 3 times of 3 years that we've been working on these KPIs. Like I say, we just want to be making progress, and progress isn't always linear. I think there's a graph later on that shows what the cost of making mistakes. But like if we're working and trying to get better at what we're doing, we're hoping to make progress across that time. I mean, a 56-day adjusted weight, adding 4 kilos to a lamb at 56 days. And I think from memory, these are terminal lambs. That's quite a financial lift. If you say you've got 1,000 or 2,000 lambs in your system, so they're just a bit of a fag pack calculation on the bottom there. 6 tons of live weight, and you can put whatever live weight price you want to put at it. But like it is a significant financial effect, and as I say, it's with the lambs you have on the ground. You're not doing a heck of a lot else to them. You're not increasing your ewes or scan or anything. That is just doing a better job, probably with better genetics, and it just goes to show what you can actually do for. Well, I always call it free. There will probably be costs involved in it, but like it is a very cheap way of improving income, I would have said.
But that 30 grams a day could very much be the difference between how well you control that spring flush of grass and carry grass through it.
It is,
and it's that level of difference.
Yeah, and keeping an eye on parasite challenge as well. But those sort of things. Like I say, there's an example later on about when we lost that, and and here it is. This is the one, 2019. We just got it wrong, and as you can see, so it is not it's not a linear one. I'm really pleased, Sam, to send you this graph. It's just, as you can see, like most of the time with our terminal lambs, and these are the Ram Compare animals, we tend to really target trying to get early growth into them. We just got 2019 for us was a more challenging year. It was wetter. There was a lot more fouling of the pastures, just with mud and a lot more, and probably a bit more parasite challenge around, and we were just didn't respond quick enough to the FECs we're doing. Left them a couple of days, and we got on with other jobs. And then it was the following week we got into young lambs, and like you haven't got. I think when you're looking at high parasite challenges, you really they have to be priority, and this sort of bears that out. I mean, that was if we looked at extra cost, because these lambs are on arable breaks that we pay per head per week. I mean, we are we've made tens of thousands of pounds mistake there. So that makes sure you don't do it in 2020. That was what we made sure of, you know. So
Well,
we
you
do
didn't.
no. So that is the key. You know, but those sort of when we talk about data-driven decisions, that's a fairly easy decision to make, and it was, you know, and it does drive home the financial impact of not just being on the ball. And so, yeah.
I'll pass you over, Duncan, in a second, but just to highlight, I suppose, on here this is taken from your Farm IT software.
Yeah.
But just to highlight to people that if you're looking at doing KPIs, or looking at comparing, you know, 8-week weights or weaning weights over different years or to different farms, it is very important that we adjust the weights. You know, if we wean a week later, we can't really compare it to last year unless we've adjusted it for that weight, because another week might be 2 kilos, and it's not because of improved management or poor management. It's just because they're simply older. So it is important to adjust your weights there. You would just, like we spoke about last week, but if you're looking at adjusting a weight, you need to also take into account the lamb's birth weight as well before you do that. So if, for example, you had a 90-day weight and a 100-day weight and you want to adjust it to the 100, you would take the 90-day weight and you would say it's 30 kilos. You would subtract the 4 kilo birth weight. If you know what it is, you might have more informed information than that, but we could take an industry average of 4.5. We would then divide that total by the number of days to give us a daily live weight gain, multiply that up by 100, add the birth weight on. That would give you your adjusted, or we could use a software to do it.
Yeah,
Excel
it's definitely
document.
better use.
And I'll pass you over to Duncan. This is 2 examples of having different management group weights and information.
Yeah. So yeah, it's definitely getting better. It's better getting software to do that one for you, especially when you're looking at management group level. Obviously, you can do that with individuals quite easily, but yeah, this is a good little graph of 2 management groups. You know, not a million miles apart in size. Well, I mean, there's 100 lambs, 150 lamb difference, but the feel of it is pretty much the same. Just there was a number of things that were going for the right-hand group, the second cycle group, that weren't going for the first main crop group. There's a terminal effect. The left-hand group is part one of our main crops, so that is basically where our stud flock, which would tend to challenge a bit more, but also they don't have the terminal genetics for growth in them. So that's one of them. It wasn't clean grazing, though we're very aware of taking regular FECs to look for worm challenges. So they definitely had a nematodiris drench and a coxy drench, though the visual appraisal of the lambs would be that they were absolutely fine. And it's not a, you know, at 56 days, they're doing 300 grams. It's not a disaster. But if you look at the right-hand group where we had that on, very high clover, clean grazing, and terminal lambs, the growth rate in them was much higher. And with them being terminal lambs as well, we were able to kind of get those lambs cashed at basically off their mums, the vast majority of them. So that made a big difference.
How often do you pick a leg count, Duncan? And when do you do it? Do you do it before they're in the handling or at the point of handling?
We do them before. We just generally what we'll have is whoever's on a quad in the morning. It is time consuming. There's no doubt about it. Like just waiting, because we tend not to gather. We just tend for a wait, just tootle around and wait for a lamb to drop it and then go and pick it up. So try and do it quite low stress. But no, we take them. Would like to think weekly with every management group at early stages, but probably in honesty, probably once a fortnight. It depends on whether we're looking at a rise and challenge. If something comes in totally clean, we might leave them a bit longer. But if something's at a low level, we might be back to it sooner. Especially for coxy, obviously with nematodiris, if we find it one, we'll go and treat. That jumps up you quite quickly. But yeah, we're quite keen on it. We don't do our own. a monthly contract with the vets, which works really well for us. So I take them in and I let the vets do them, and they're pretty good at turning them around the same day.
All right, good.
Yeah,
it's good. Another kind of key point to my mind, in a way, about using data to influence your management, and in reverse, using weaning is a key management tool in itself. And actually shouldn't really be, we'll talk about kind of what should be your target weaning dates or what's suggested. And I think ultimately that's probably sitting about 12 to 13 weeks of age. So looking at sort of 100-day weaning. Thereafter, the influence of milk really isn't adding much. And actually the lambs are just competing with ewes for often poorer quality late summer feed and would be better off weaned. But it's a key management tool if we've got issues. Average birth weight, and going back to that, figuring out your daily live weight gains. If you have a group of lambs, you can use plus 10 days on the start of lambing as the average birth date to then go and figure out the average age of that group. But ultimately, we're using data can help us, facilitate when we decide to wean. So particularly if we have an 8-week wait, we can see how things are going. And if we know ewes are in poor condition, if we knew that ewe hogs weren't up to target weights, if we know that lamb growth rates are slipping below, I mean, we spoke about 240 grams earlier on, but if your lamb growth rates are poor, we might need to act, but also we might choose to wean earlier if we've got better feed to put them on. And also if we know that our pasture quality, particularly if we measure, if our pasture quantity, is declining, or we just know it's very evident we're in a drought, we can use that as a key management tool to wean. That'll instantly cut a lot of feed out of the ewes, because you can then put them on a maintenance diet within reason in terms of having enough time to regain body condition before tupping. But you can put them on to a tighter feeding regime potentially, and you can prioritize the lambs in the best pasture. That priority group will have to revert when you think about regaining condition. And we might also use weaning as a key tool if we know that certain groups, for example, ewe hogs or triplet bearing ewes, might benefit from weaning earlier. So we can use a lot of data there to try and influence what we're doing. And I think, Duncan, just very quickly, maybe just cautious of time, you're probably going the next level in terms of that feed budget side of things using what's Farmac software.
Yeah. This is just a quick snapshot of where our pasture is at the minute. It's a little bit of a embarrassing. It shows the effect within a year. So of where we are in a good grass growth year with not having a lump of extra ground stocked. So actually have, we're running at very high covers at the minute. And there is another one to go in, probably on that. I have that is not in yet, but it's on that October, November. Well, now basically. So I would imagine it's probably not a million miles out off that graph. But as you can see, the top line is actual grass measurement. So that is the covers we have across the farm as an average. And the bottom is the minimum, the bottom grey line is the minimum amount of dry matter that we require per hectare to maintain and give energy to whatever we're grazing. That is grazed grass. So everything that those dips in it aren't adjusting and stocking rate. They're inputs of supplement, and supplements can be anything from so I mean, we don't buy feed in, but like if we add bales or fodder crop or silage or hay into that, that's where the drop in demand comes. So
and
we use this
forward budget based on your pasture covers, and if it knows you go too low,
exactly,
it'll know that you might be low in the winter, and that might influence, for example, in the autumn, your decisions on selling stock.
Exactly. Yes, it'll influence decisions on selling stock, and it'll monitorize it.
Yeah,
which is
so
quite
make
important.
decisions about what might be
so,
there.
Yeah, so that is quite important. It's a tool that we've used historically to get us out of a hole, though we're not in that kind of hole in the minute, just simply because of the acquisition of a bit more ground. But in 2018, I think we had that very dry year where we're using it a lot to see what we needed to do to get ourselves through a winter, because we were going what is called red lining, going through that pinch point in March, April, where it was telling us 6 months ahead that we had to take action, whether that was sell stock, buy feed, and we ended up doing both. And we offloaded all our ewe lambs onto keep. as we had not. But it enabled us to make a decision in September to purchase, to buy standard silage, and apply for an organic derogation to do that as well. So we weren't actually hunting about in a hungry market in March, April for organic silage. So, you know, that's
value.
it does that. That was a real big win with it. That I always use as an example, but it's always a good thing to kind of keep a track of where you are, and it gives us an idea. This gives us an idea about where we can go with stocking rates in the future as well.
Perfect. Lamb finishing performance. I think we spoke quite a lot already about the kind of key drivers, but ultimately we have very, very limited ability to judge weight by eye. We can often look at if we think things are well, but ultimately we have limited ability to judge weight and zero ability to assess growth rate. So even if lambs are well growing, if we have them back in the pens, our ability to actually assess whether they're carrying on growing is quite limited, generally until we can see clinical signs. And if we can identify with weigh-in, there's something going wrong, we can try and, you know, mitigate that issue quicker. And ultimately that's doing regular weighings, using it to influence our management. That might be testing, for example, your fecal egg counts or even minerals. It's absolutely essential that we get accurate weights. So we need to calibrate our scales, but also consider that gut fill factor as well. I did find a stat from, well, it's a New Zealand stat again, 24 hours of fasting is worth about 2.25% of the loss of body weight. So for a fat lamb, you're looking at about 2 kilos of fluctuation if it was completely empty. Not that it's ever probably going to be that point, but you can see how much fluctuation you might get, for example, of lambs weighed at the start of the day, but then in the handling system for a long time, they empty out their bowels, they don't eat. You can see how big fluctuations there are. So it's worth trying to consider about that the time of day that you work them, but also in terms of your handling durations as well, to try and get accurate weights. Lambs don't grow just because they're weighed, you know, and also handling generally causes a growth check. There is a stress element there. So we want to tie in our data recording with management tasks. For example, it might be select pulling out lambs to finish. We might also have to try and limit this or reduce it. You might have different groups of different weight bands. But I think it's just worth pointing out on the gut fill point of view, there might be a tendency to move to really, really regular weigh-ins, and that actually might reduce your accuracy, because the more frequent, for example, every week, the greater the influence of that gut fill and also the weather is going to be. And actually, if we go too close in our weigh dates, we might just see big fluctuations due to that. And if we consider, you know, if lambs are going 200 grams a day over 7 days, that's 1.4 kilo, but our gut fill might not be that far away from it. So we can see if we actually get too excited, we might lose accuracy. And just a side note, TST is quite an interesting way of using data in terms of looking at growth rates in lambs and using that to influence your worming strategy. Work at Morden and Kirkton have generally found no impact on lamb performance, but a 40% reduction in the amount of wormer used. So trying to reduce that anthelmintic resistance buildup, trying to use less wormer, we can find that using the TST approach with growth rates, we can generally maintain performance whilst reducing a bit. We've got target growth rates, and here's just some industry targets, but what we can generally see is that it's all about quality of feed. And if we can get more and more, you know, red clover or creep feed's probably the king, but high quality pastures are really going to help you push there as well. And it's always worth doing a cost benefit analysis as well of potential feed inputs if you've got other options. If you're not on target, as we've already reiterated, we quite often see lambs performing poorly and think about worms and trace elements, but they might be looking like that lamb over there in a field full of short grass and probably lame at the same time. And actually, if you look at the graph on the right-hand side, and it might seem pretty obvious, but I think it's quite a good graph, is that feed energy of the diet and lamb live weight gain is just so highly correlated. It's a linear line straight up the graph there. And that is our grassland management left to right. If we can maintain leafy grass, we're at the right-hand side. If we lose it, we're on the left-hand side. And the more clover we can have in our pastures, the further we are to the right-hand side. So we want to keep that nutrition going. And that actually is the first thing we should look at before we consider if we've got issues with worms, trace elements, getting out there and looking at the quality of the pasture. We then might consider things such as, you know, looking at worms and then looking at trace elements would be your key ones. But going back to Duncan's point there about averages can be misleading sometimes. And you might look at a group of lambs with an average and think that they're not performing well. And it might be relative to nutrition if it's a bit of a growth curve, you know, you've got a bell curve. But we could also see potentially is a sharp increase on the left-hand side of a subsect of lambs doing poorly. And what that could be, for example, might be a sign of lameness. And so that's a different angle of treatment you're going to go in with there. You know, perhaps a lot of lambs are still doing well. So it's worth, you know, you've got a true test box, even if you are just, you know, looking at it by hand, looking at that spread in the performance to see what the issue is. Is it an all-round performance? Is it an individual animal issue you might want to put in? And I think lameness is quite a good one that you can sometimes see the lameness in the daily live weight gains before you might have lambs hobbling around all over the place. Then you might look at other testing such as fecal egg counts, blood testing. And data, again, is so valuable. If you're going to put in inputs, for example, you're looking at maybe, you know, you think you've got a cobalt issue or a copper issue or something like that. Can you do an on-farm trial? You know, consider looking at maybe leaving a control group to see that you're getting a cost benefit of using the inputs. I'll just pass you back over to Duncan. This is just one of the slides showing a bit of monitoring lamb performance and how they go about it. You generally do a lot of recording on your true test box, Duncan, and go back to the software.
Yes, that's right. And then it's generally office based, so it's office based, so we I just generally bring it back to the PC to run any analysis on it. But basically, what we have two sets of scales. We'll have a manual drafter and an electric auto drafter as well. So both of them work really well in, you know, good bits of kit. We'll try and weigh lambs. We would weigh lambs in at birth if possible, and then at 56 days and a weaning weight at 100 days, or a slaughter weight that would come later, and then we'll weigh them regularly throughout the season when we're drawn. So yeah, and it just gives us an idea that this is how we kind of correlate these sort of management group decisions about it. I mean, it was an interesting one, that photo you had on last Daniel. It was, you know, how to manage that sort of, sometimes it's really hard to manage pasture with just sheep, and like we are quite lucky, you know, as a farmer, and I think sometimes people undervalue the cows as a good grassland management tool, especially cows and calves, where you can actually, if you're struggling to manage pasture, you can get through it and let lambs take the best out of it and follow on with cows and calves. It seems we find that leader follower quite good, though it's obviously not clean grazing. So yeah, so monitoring lamb performance is quite a key thing of you know, one of the main KPIs of what we target to try and do.
Perfect. Another example of monitoring lambs or monitoring subsequent lambs, growth rates. I think probably one of the most important animals actually on a farm, if you're going to breed, is your ewe hogs, to monitor that growth rates and performance. Let's move that out of the way. We know that young ewes, this is based, I've got a few kind of subsects here of challenge sheep data, but they found that young ewes are responsible for 40% of light lambs, that, you know, denominated as under 17 kilos at 8-week weight. We know that breeding ewe hogs can be a high reward. We know that we can increase our income from generally limited additional costs. We can, you know, probably won't change our stocking rate that much if we took the ewe hogs. We might capitalize a bit more on some of that, you know, surplus grass in the summer. But we do know that it's a high risk game, and it can lead to poor performance, highest lambing assistance, high mastitis rates, and subsequently impact our gimmer performance. And we have target weights here, which are kind of industry standard, that we want to be 60% of mature weight at tupping. That's not to say that's not an average. Going back to it, we want those that we tup to be over 60%. We want to be lambing at 75, and we want to be mating at 80% of gimmer at a gimmer. So that's whether they're tupped or not. You want to get back up to that weight. You want steady growth. You want good growth, and that's why it's essential to monitor performance. So every time they're in, getting a weight, seeing how they're doing, and seeing, do I need to try and adapt my nutrition? Because the risk is that you have this issues of you know, pretty bad performance issues, and that should influence our management. Also, if they're not performing, we might choose to wean them. And what we can see here then is we've got kind of target ewe lamb growth rates over the winter to, on the blue line, make our target weight, and we really want steady growth rates through the winter without much of a check to then kind of plateau in the last 6 weeks so that we don't have issues with big lambs. So getting that growth in early rather than trying to catch up in late pregnancy, which can be a shambles. Really good challenge sheep data, on target tupping hogs, average lamb weight at 90 days, if they were on target, was 31.2 kilos. So that's combined if they had twins or singles. But for those below the target of 60%, which for a 70 kilogram ewe like Duncan has, is about 42 kilo, or slightly lighter for Duncan's case, whilst below was 17.7 kilos. So we can see that we can lose a serious amount of performance if we're not on target. We can also, if we then breed new hogs and then subsequently lose out on gimmer weights and don't meet target, from challenge sheep, they found an 11% reduction for gimmers that failed to meet their target in terms of their total lambs weaned weight. But actually, interestingly, for the group of above target on the project, they got another 11%. So there was an 8 kilo difference in weaning weights. So the bigger the gimmer, the better she's going to perform, and also considering your body condition score as well. And they also found that those that gained performance more gradually in development through to a gimmer performed better than those that went through rapid sort of store and loss scenarios throughout the year. I think it's a really good example of when you need to employ data to influence your management is breeding hogs. This is just an example of Duncan using TrueTest. We can see some information about average lambs combined into average and minimum weights. So we can also look at lamb weights on this graph here, like we were speaking about earlier on. So, is there issues? This is hogs' own lambs, not hogs themselves, but we can see differences there. I'll pass you over to Duncan just to see their sort of experiences of breeding hogs over the last year or two.
Yeah, this one is just a graph of last year's ewe hogs that we mated and we're tracking them through. As you can see, when we got to a mating weight roughly at that 6 month mark of getting up towards an average weight of about 40 kilos. There was quite a spread in there, so some of them would have been plus 50. We would probably work quite hard on ours, so anything north of 35 kilos quite often gets a chance of the ram. And then, as you can see, they had a little bit of a hard winter with a kind of flatline growth rate. I mean, I don't think that is probably a true reflection in that there might have been a good fill between the two weighing points, a good fill effect in that they were scanned and then weighed. As you can see, scanning's around about that sort of 10. Scan weight was around that 10, 11 months. And then we were going through, and the 14-month weight was first 8 week weight with lamb. So we managed to keep these hogs growing pretty well from point of scan to lambing. 56 days in, they were on some really premium, basically the best feed we could get them grown onto. We're very lucky in that, I'm like a total Shetland convert when it comes to tucking ewe lambs. We had a really outstandingly low assist rate and really good growth in them as well. I mean, they were on probably as good a sheep feed as you'd find anywhere. That was totally clean red and white clover lays on an arable, an organic arable place on up near Berwick, and it really made them go. But one of the key advantages I found with the Shetland is we didn't have to worry about keeping these ewe lambs going and keeping them growing because of the relatively low birth weight of the Shetland. So when we had, I think we touched 6 out of 410, which was just an outstanding result. First time we've ever done it, and yeah, I was really pleased with it. And as you can see, we're going through there. So we would have weighed them several times when we're looking drawn lambs. So the hogs went through. That's probably a little bit of a weaning check for the hogs. At that sort of 16 month where they were probably standing around, probably had them on less preferential grazing, but there might have been a bit of an anomaly because they came back within 4 weeks back to their normal weight, and they're tracking through. And hopefully the main crop hogs will be weighing this week, but we're hoping that they're going to be Well, it will be, because they're already at it there. We're hoping for them to be near enough a mature size. Pretty much now we're probably looking at 63, 64 kilos, whereas we're probably looking at about a 69 kilo mature size. So we're being really pleased with the hog performance this year.
I think it also highlights that value in that clover swords that you've got, that it's supporting high lamb weaning weights and also the growth of that hog.
Exactly. It's just like
there's
bulling
a risk of mastitis as well in hogs as well.
Yeah, it's really important to give them the best you've got in first lactation when they're trying to grow and they're trying to milk lambs as well, or calve when you're calving it too.
Yep, for sure.
You know, and we've made all of them mistakes. So
it's about learning, isn't it? We'll just finish very quickly then on the Ram Compare project, because I think you've been involved in it. It's just quite interesting. Would you like to just give a couple of minutes kind of on the Ram Compare side of things and what you've done for the project and the results that you found?
We got involved with the Ram Compare project in its initiation. I suppose having a bit of a track record on data collection helped, and a performance record. The ideal would have, I think, for the project would have been to have like a performance recorded use, so you had the maternal data on them as well, which we had. But obviously, there's not that many people recording animals that they're willing to just breed slaughter lambs out of. So we've been involved with it since then. We're sent every year. We're sent a new team of rams across most of the sort of main terminal breeds. So we've had Texels, Charolais, Meatlinks, Hampshires. We've had Suffolks. We'll get most of them every year, and then we've had Shropshires, Oxfords, Blue Texels, Suff Texas. So we'll get it is a bit of a mixed bag. The lambs at the start of the slideshow you'll see were quite a mixed bag of lambs breed wise. What is good about it, and I think one of the things that's been really borne out about it, is that terminal genetics are a real easy hit for any farm to go and buy. The value in them is fairly stark. So one of the questions I always get asked about is what breed would you have? And I can honestly say that we've found very little breed difference in nearly all of what you'd say were the welfare traits. So lamb survival, lambing assists, lamb vigor, all of those things have been, there hasn't been enough variation, because we were probably looking at putting a lamb survival EBV into the terminal size, but the project hasn't found enough variation to give that. But basically, if you're buying a ram with good terminal EBVs, then you tend to get what you pay for. It has come through. They're very heritable traits. Growth, muscle, fat are very heritable traits, and are widely measured in terminal sires. So it seems to definitely borne that out.
And it's pulled it out on your system, Duncan, even when you've got already quite low days to slaughter. Actually, on some of the farms with a sort of older days to slaughter, there's been even bigger variation. You've got a 10-day variation in the top 10 performing rams for days to slaughter versus the bottom 10 on your farm. But for some farms, I think one of the farms even had a 30-day difference in sire genetics. And yes, for some of the farms, some of that extreme days to slaughter might have compromised a small amount of carcass weight, because they might be earlier finished well, or more fatter genetics. But actually, for you actually saw a 0.2 kilogram improvement in those days to slaughter. So that was high index terminal sire genetics, giving you reduced days to slaughter and a slight uplift in carcass traits.
Yeah, I think we could have spread that if we managed things different or marketed in a different manner. Would have probably spread that further. We're happy to go at, as you'll see, lighter weights. So we're getting away in mid-June for cash flow, and gives us a chance to double crop these high quality clover lays, so we can actually go with main crop ram lambs that will, are either to grow on, but mostly will be to finish. to follow these in behind of these, and yeah, so I think our management actually tightens that because we don't want them around. So we're happy to have lighter weights to get these lambs moving.
I think it's about knowing what your system, what traits you want to breed within the system. If you're looking at a terminal sire, it's not always just about looking at high index. It's looking at that balance of traits. I know at home we're very much focused on the scan weight, 8-week weights, because we're selling store lambs, and
yeah,
as long as he's a decent looking tup and he's got high growth, then we're pretty happy. We take that over just chasing more carcass value, for example.
Yeah.
And we can see, part of this project was to look at trying to verify, does the key terminal sire recording, which is basically, designed on your 2 weights, your scan weight, and then ultrasound back fat scanning, which is on the loin, does that correlate to the carcass traits and the days to slaughter? And they found really good correlations. This is more Duncan's data from Sam, which just shows that correlation between scan weight EBV and your days to slaughter. And we really did find that, Duncan, didn't you, in the system, that you had the higher scan weight, the higher growth genetics in terms of the weight EBV were delivering higher days to slaughter. And they found the same with the weight traits as well, the carcass traits as well.
No, well, thank you very much.
Good night, everyone.
If I can answer any questions for anybody, feel free to get in touch.
Appreciate that, Duncan.
Cheers.
Thanks.
Thanks. Bye-bye.